And once again, I want to say greetings to each and every one of you at Quaba and welcome. Welcome to our Friday broadcast we call Making Money Fridays. And two times a month, I am joined by my colleague, Dr. Steph. And we look at what is happening across the spectrum of activities related to entrepreneurship, business development, wealth development, all areas of interactivity and empowerment. Today's date is Friday, the 8th of November, the year 2024. In the Western calendar, this corresponds to the year 6264. In the Kemetic calendar, it's we have realigned our cultural clock. Welcome to the seventh millennium. You have found your family in a peaceful place. You're on LIV Radio, LIV TV, and livinginblack.com. Let me welcome to the platform today. Dr. Steph is in the house. Aquaba, welcome to you, Dr. Steph. I hope you're in beautiful spirits today.
Of course. Yes. Thank you. And happy to be here.
Well, it is a pleasure to have you with us. Let me give the people the topic for today, and then let's engage in our discussion. Today on LIB Radio, Show Me the Money with Dr. Steph discusses strategies for success in real estate development and how to create long-term wealth through property investments. As home ownership is every family's dream and the oldest way to secure intergenerational wealth, too many of us are being locked out of this wealth producing market. That is our theme, our subject for today. Good choice for that, and especially in the immediate aftermath. We're just 3 days now into the realization that Donald Trump has won by a significant margin. If you look at the Electoral College, his second term as president, without biasing your response with a long question, what do you think about this election outcome?
There's a lot. There's an impossible response that's brief and succinct. But what I would say is that as entrepreneurs, the first message that I gave yesterday was to realize that the administration has potential to change every
Mm-hmm.
4 years during the election cycle. Just like the stock market performance, we go through bull and bear cycles, and those things are cyclical. So what
Yes.
you have to do, what I learned very early as an entrepreneur, and thankfully I had my first business at 18, I was given a few sets of information in terms of understanding politics. Business people typically invest in both parties because whichever party prevails, they need to have relationships with whatever administration is functioning, because you don't expect to be in and out of business every 4 years. You
Mm.
expect to build a business over multiple generations. And so it's important that you understand the policies. And yes, the policies might differ between each potential party and what it is they're offering. But also, neither party has a 100% plan that's going to so-called solve all of the problems that you may encounter. So what you
Mm-hmm.
have to do, it sort of reminds me of a couple things that my mother used to say, is that it's like sifting flour, right? You have to sift through and pull out what the opportunities may be that you can utilize to your advantage. One thing, when the Republican Party is in charge, then typically we see a reduction in some of the governmental aggressiveness around overburdensome policies to keep all of these government employees employed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I agree with that philosophy. I think there's a lot of waste that happens in terms of excesses in the government. And I was sharing with someone one thing that I noticed between the global pandemic and shutdown and when the Trump administration was in house. It was the first time that the government was forced to efficiently distribute resources, especially from the Small Business Administration. The Small Business Administration has never succeeded in effectively distributing resources. The amount of red tape that you encounter to do business with the government, to get any type of government support for your business, is burdensome. And it's because
Hmm.
most of the people that make those decisions are not entrepreneurs. They have jobs, they have paychecks, so they make decisions based upon a business being start from scratch, following the idea that you should still somehow or another get a paycheck every week. It's ridiculous. Yet in the US economy, the backbone of our economy is small businesses. So why
That's
would you
right.
burden the main economic driver in this country? But over and over and over again, unfortunately, those policies end up producing that outcome. If small businesses can't survive, they're the local job creators.
That's right.
So
Very, very important point.
hopeful that in this new administration shift again, at a time that small businesses are dying on the vine, I've watched more and more small businesses come out of the pandemic and under this last administration end up bankrupt. And it's tragic. We're talking about commercial real estate, and I had a portfolio of thriving clients who were growing their businesses, following all the rules, managed to somehow or another get through all the hurdles of SBA financing and expand their businesses only to end up with bankrupt businesses and
Mm.
having to start all over again.
Excellent points you make. I do completely agree with every line item. Yesterday we had a discussion. I was supposed to have a guest and then he canceled on how the Democratic Party is imploding, and the evidence is there that it's imploding right now. And I would now, in retrospect, especially with that statement you just shared, would love to have had you in the circle of the conversation. Hopefully, where when things like that come up again, I'll say, oh, remember, Dr. Steph has some very pointed insights. Anything else you want to share on that before we go to this critical topic of property investment and,
Yeah, the
and
last
wealth
part of that,
accumulation? Hmm.
absolutely. The last part of that was just like I said early on, what I learned was to be a part. I was told, and I don't know if this is fact, but that typically in an Asian family, the husband is a member of one party and the wife is a member of the other party. And that's so that they can gain insight on what each party is saying and be able to understand strategically how to make decisions about their existence, and whether that is true or not. That's kind of the philosophy that I followed. I learned very early on that it was a foregone conclusion that I was a Democrat just by being a Black American in this country. So I really didn't have to, do a lot to be associated with the party. What I had to do in order to learn about what was happening in the Republican Party was get involved with that party and see what are the policies that are being put forth and how would strategically now understanding both sides of the coin, what types of decisions I could make about my business. And so I just think that it's very important as citizens, as people, that we find ways to not just reject, directly what the other party may or may not represent. Investigate,
Hmm.
investigate, get the real facts, please.
That's right. That's right.
Better able to
Because
inform
both
decisions.
both parties featured in this race, particularly candidates that were not necessarily very candid candidates. They obfuscated, they withheld a lot of information, and got a little bit dreamy eyed about what was happening within their own head. And that's just not a basis for good governance. So
Right.
I appreciate,
Transparency.
yeah, you were saying?
I said transparency. We need some transparency. We need the facts, please.
That's
And,
right.
and with the facts, then hopefully we can make informed decisions.
Now, one thing that does lead from that conversation to our conversation today is debt. When it comes to financial investments, especially property investments, home ownership, and commercial real estate development, debt becomes very, very critical. One thing we did see today the news has announced that the Federal Reserve has lowered the interest rate by, I think, 1/4% or so. That could be significant. But let's start to talk about how do people invest in real estate properties, real estate development, building wealth through property investment.
Absolutely. One of my favorite topics. So I'm excited about this conversation and totally, yeah, elated to share my perspective because I think a
Hmm.
lot of times people, again, are ill informed and they do it in the reverse scenario. So they find themselves in jeopardy at a later point. But let's go.
Hmm. I have been a mortgage owner 2 times in my life, and both times the property slipped through my hands. So I'm probably not the best person to talk to about this, even though I think I have learned some lessons. The second lesson, I took on a mortgage note, and it was a significant upgrade in my what had been my rental payments. My problem, if I look at it right now, I should never have moved into that house alone, which kind of reminds me of if it's a 3 bedroom or 4 bedroom house, then put at least two people paying the note in those rooms. And then the other point is for many people, the best way to start off in property investment is not to buy a single family home. I'm sure you're aware of that strategy.
That is what I advocate. And very early in my career, it was my desire. Well, I started off in advertising, but it was my mother who was in real estate. And with her early passing, I found myself as an investor having purchased my second property. I got into financial jeopardy, and I realized that even though my property had a bunch of equity, I couldn't unlock the equity. Not because I didn't have money saved, but because there was a situation where as soon as I closed on the mortgage, the employer that I was working with eliminated my position. And so I no longer had income. And the ability to get the mortgage or to even refinance my property and pull out the equity was 100% dependent upon me having that income. And it was really when I began to study my mother's books, I'm like, wait a second, I can't let this happen to me. What's going on? What was the situation? I felt like I didn't need to be the expert in real estate because she was, but yet she died very early. So now I had to learn the business because I decided that I really wanted to understand real estate. I believed in it and I saw it as a vehicle to create wealth. The number one mistake that most people make is they get emotional and they think that they need to run out and buy a house.
Mm.
But this country was built on creating a pathway for the working class. And the pathway, the memo that the working class gained was that the reason that a 1 to 4 is financed the same way is so that you won't go into property only dependent upon your solo income. If
Mm.
you buy a 2 to 4 unit as your first purchase, you get to finance that with as little as 3 to 5% if you're using an FHA product. What that means is that you've made that down payment do about 3 or 4 jobs for you. If for some reason you have up to 4 units that you were able to finance with as little of 5% down, you're in the position to win. You're in a stronger position to retain and sustain that mortgage over a 30-year period because you're dependent now on not just your income, you have 3 other folks' income that are contributing to paying that mortgage. Now, you
Hmm.
mentioned opening it if you buy a 3 bedroom house, having people live with you. I was never a fan of really having people live with me. I always kind of preferred to live by myself. Uh,
Hmm.
but if it is that you wanted to go into a situation and share a property, then yes, that is another way to do so. Most people recognize that a better approach or an alternative approach is to buy units.
Hmm.
You buy units, then as I told my son, I said, listen, buy 2 to 4 units every year for 10 years, and your retirement will take care of itself.
Hmm. Okay. Buy two or more units every year. And I would
Two to
imagine.
four, 2 to 4, not or more. There's a
Mm-hmm.
very distinct difference. When you get to five, it's commercial. So the amount
Mm-hmm.
of down payment changes significantly.
That's right. Yeah. And again, one would imagine that after several years of this strategy of accumulating these revenue generating properties, that it makes it even easier now to be able to accumulate the subsequent properties because of the equity being built up and the track record.
It's not only the equity being built, but yes, and it's the track record as well. And also, every time you acquire a 2 to 4 unit, you're able to use 75% of the rental income to help you qualify for the property. Because I have people that says, well, wait a minute, I don't make enough money to qualify. Trust me, you're not asking the right questions. You're not dealing with the right person to assist you. But there's a way. In fact, you'll find that it's easier to buy 2 to 4 units than it is to buy a single family residence.
Mm-hmm. How does one find these available 2 to 4 unit
Just like you would
buildings?
find a single family residence. They're all listed the same.
Okay, okay. Because I was in my mind thinking that maybe looking for elderly people who maybe wanted to cash out and not have to deal with property management or other type of situations like that.
It's a
Maybe
both
distressed families, bank foreclosures. Are these available?
across assets, but typically, if a person has a 2 to 4, the likelihood that they're going to be distressed is usually slimmer
Mm-hmm.
because they've been able to hopefully maintain those properties. But yes, as with anything, it's a possibility that if the area that the property has been held has experienced a lot of development, and say, for example, the property taxes have been increased as a result of the property appreciating in value in a particular community, that could be a reason for distress. Or if it is for some reason there's been vacancies or extended vacancies or a lack of appreciating the rental income as the markets have reset or grown, then sometimes those things, but it's just like shopping for any other asset. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of, if you're looking for it, it's there and it's available. And the thing that I have to tell people oftentimes, because I was advising this strategy. I have family members who were in a situation where they could each have acquired, 2 to 4 units. And it was like, well, I don't want to live there. And it's like, okay, that's why you guys can't make any money. You invest where you make money, then you live where you want to live.
Hmm. Okay, you invest where you make money, and then you live where you want to live. Great, great points. We do see our audience is in the house today. I just want to say greetings to each and every one of you. Our sister for Africa One is checking in from the UK. She says, Hetep, Brother Keedy, Sister Dr. Steph, and the Global LMB family. Great to have you with us. And we do see Motorhead Man is doubling in on, is checking in with us on you now. We appreciate all of you. Make sure you hit the like button. And if you have a comment or a question, something Dr. Steph shares, do type that into the chat. We'd love to get your engagement, your involvement in all of this. So if you were to have a, say, 1 to 10 checklist or 1 to 12 checklist, how does one begin to refocus themselves and become a property investor?
So you want to understand what's happening in the particular marketplace. As an investor, we typically look at what are the variables that create migration patterns in a particular market. So I'm looking at what's happening in the economy, what's happening in the local market as it relates to employers. Who are the major employers? Are there major universities in an area that I'm looking to invest? Because if there's universities, for example, there's a college town. Will those colleges continue to have demand for students as well as professors? Because then
Mm-hmm.
they'll need housing. And so they help to stabilize a particular community. If major employers are shifting from one location to another location, where are they going? What's happening with the local general plan. What are the zoning laws and regulatory environments for the assets that are contained? What we say, what are the by right laws that allows the use of a particular asset? Are there any shifts being made? So, for example, I served on the South Los Angeles Community Advisory Committee. We were updating the general plan. This was some years back. And all of the homes that fell within the area were going to be upzoned, which meant that they were suddenly going to be worth more because now there was approval to change the zoning from the R1 designation to up to R4, which meant now you could subdivide that land and you could create higher density assets. And so that's an opportunity. Again, if you're not sophisticated, what I've been telling for years to people, if your family, for example, has land and you don't know how to develop it, don't. Put it in a family trust and do a 99-year land lease to a developer that knows how to develop it. Keita, you're muted. I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I was drinking my tea and clearing my throat. Yeah, that's an excellent point that you make because most of us really haven't had the type of family background and or extended education, higher learning to be able to manage real estate and property assets, which is why so many people don't succeed in this arena.
Yes, because 30 years is a long time to deal with, a life. A lot of things happen in 30 years. There's loss of jobs, there's illness, there's divorce, there's all kind of devastation that could happen over a 30-year lifetime. So you really do want to think about your strategies. And then the other things that people fail to use are tools like insurance. That was one thing. Like I said, my mother was the one who realized early on about real estate. First, she started off learning commercial real estate and then she shifted into residential real estate. But she kind of told me, baby, just remember location, location, location way back then. And she used to say that land wasn't man-made. And I jokingly said, too bad she didn't live long enough to see Dubai. Right. I had an opportunity to visit Dubai and, Saudi and all of these places. And I'm like, well, over in Dubai, they're making it, or up in Foster City in the Bay Area, they're creating it right now. Some have said that after a while it starts to sink again. But nonetheless, for a period of time, they've sold it. But even, and I'm not sure if this is accurate, I'd have to look it up again. But, cities have been built on completely leased land. And that was what I understood to be the case in a city called Marina del Rey in Southern California, for example, that if you bought a condo, I used to live in the marina across the water from the Ritz. And there was a condo building that I had investigated making a purchase. And part of your purchase was that you also had to pay for the land lease in addition to your HOAs, because the condo property was built on a land lease. And so that just lets you know when people say, well, what do you mean by putting our land in a family trust and leasing it? Yes, if the developer can develop whatever. In fact, I just met a gentleman, I was in Scottsdale, and he was sharing that he finally closed on his funding because he has a 99-year lease of an island in Fiji. So it's a very common practice to have the land be leased and the ownership retained by those who own the land, but recognize that they're not able to make the sophisticated investment to allow that land to realize its highest and best use. And that, again, is the lens that I look at every asset with as a developer. What is the highest and best use for this particular asset?
There are multiple scenarios changing around the world now due to climate change. Severe weather patterns are occurring, including the ocean level rising. And now, if we just look at the state of Florida, where real estate has been quite competitive for decades, Now, with the coastal regions in danger of these seasonal and climate change related events and insurance so difficult to find, as a real estate property investor and developer, would you see opportunity in crisis areas due to climate change or other what are called black swan events?
Yes, and it depends. It depends on the use. So that's the thing is whenever I go in and I evaluate a particular area, I'm looking at what is the plan for the next 30 years, but what are the environmental factors? You know, when we plan out a development, we have to look at all of these variables depending upon the type of use that we're planning for that asset. So, what are the utilities available? What are the weather patterns? Is it within a flood zone? You know, what are all the factors environmentally that may impact this particular development? How will we ensure and protect against potential devastation? And what are those potential high risk disasters that might be realized in this particular area? So you want to take all of those things into consideration. You want to both look back historically, but also look forward in terms of what the projections, what's projected as it relates to the future of those particular assets.
Mm-hmm. All right. Have you been following the challenges that they're talking about with the state of Florida, especially as the last decade or decade and a half, the hurricane season has been becoming more and more destructive?
So I haven't been looking at Florida in particular. I'm actually investing in global markets at this time. And so I've been underwriting a portfolio of assets globally. But still, in one of the places in Jamaica, Jamaica has a season for hurricanes. And I had an opportunity to spend a couple years through each of the cycles so that I could understand where the potential impact is. And I understand South Coast is usually the area that's most greatly impacted during the hurricane period. But I've also looked at some of the areas that I'm investing to evaluate what are the impacts in those areas as well. And are those, concerns that I need to be majorly concerned about, or are there mitigation measures that I can consider in order to mitigate against the potential risk of what a hurricane may or may not, create in that region, and what's the time period. I'm from the Bay Area, so people were afraid of earthquakes, right? And so as a result of that, the building codes oftentimes are updated. Engineers get together and consider what are the particular risks, and especially after there's been devastation in a particular region. And so oftentimes the building codes are updated to reflect ways of mitigating some of those particular risks. They changed the way they built high rises in San Francisco, again, as a result of the impact of earthquakes. And so it happens in each region, and I'm sure Florida is no different in their approach to figuring out how can they sustain development. What are the decisions that need to be made when evaluating a particular type of project and or use?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can see that the entire Gulf region is problematic because of hurricanes. From my understanding, evaluating today's news, perhaps the last hurricane of this season, which usually lasts up until the second week or so of November, is now stirring in the Gulf region. It's not expected to be real destructive because the summer heating of the waters is much less now. But nonetheless, if a person is built or bought into that region and they're in these vulnerable lowlands such as the Louisiana Delta region and different parts of the Gulf Coast, they're going to have to make considerations about the viability of living in this region for the next 10, 20, 30 years as the pattern of global warming is becoming more and more established.
Absolutely. And, I'm not going to get into any conspiracy things, but we think that, not all of these things are just a result of nature as much as they're a result of some of the man made decisions that end up influencing these particular places. Years back when there was Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, I remember having just attend a commercial real estate finance event maybe 6 months before that happened. And I found the experience being a little bit unsettling when I walked into the room. There was a huge room, probably with 1,000 commercial real estate and finance professionals, and it was clear that I was the raisin, in the oatmeal in the room.
Mm,
But in listening
mm-hmm.
to those conversations, I was stunned later when the levies and all of this stuff, and it was clear that in that room, there were conversations about what the plans were for that waterfront property. So it had already been identified as an opportunity. And oftentimes that's what happens. And this again is why it's so important to follow the zoning legislation in a particular area. When cities use a tool called eminent domain, oftentimes that tool is for the benefit of developers to come in and
Mm-hmm.
invest in an area that they want and that they want to redevelop, but they don't want to pay for significant investment in the cost of the land. And they don't want to go
Mm-hmm.
through the hard process of assembling the parcels individually. So
Mm-hmm.
the city is then able to, when you see areas oftentimes that have been depressed, sometimes they're depressed on purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. And if one were to say it's not conspiracy theory, let me show you the evidence. I would love to be a part of building that evidence because as we look now in the aftermath of Katrina, I think we probably have what close to 20 years in the aftermath of that, that the Ward 9 district, which was considered to be one of the most distressed sections of the city, well, that Ward 9 has had some pretty dramatic changes. Parts of it rebuilt, but many parts of it were not rebuilt. And then the land speculators came in after the property sat vacant and non productive for so long. The land speculators came in and grabbed up everything they could. I haven't looked at it recently, but I did follow some of these trends, and I would agree with you that there was some highly questionable facts behind the breaching of these levees and the flooding of the area and the clearing out of the Ward 9 population.
Absolutely. And it's even the same thing I had shared recently with someone that I noticed in some of the communities in Nevada where they're removing all of the grass and the trees and replacing them with, the rock, and how much that increases the heat in that community when you remove what was absorbing the heat and creating moisture. So, especially when I go now to areas, again, my experiences when I'm on the islands where they're rich in vegetation, there's a different experience between that richness. That richness creates and cultivates and retains moisture as
Hmm.
opposed to these so called um, what are these water conservation measures that in essence
Hmm.
create the increase of the warming. If there's nothing to absorb or to create moisture in the air, then it's sort of like you're working in reverse. And it seems
Hmm.
that again it's about what is the mentality, who's leading the policies and why, because some of the policies don't really make sense.
So, as a person who would be a property investor in the long run, uh, it sounds to me as if you're suggesting that they just look beyond just acquiring property, financing the properties, etc., but to look at the long-term strategic areas surrounding living in that area. I mean, you and I live in Las Vegas. Las Vegas is a beautiful, comfortable city to live in for many reasons, but it's built in the middle of the doggone desert. And in reality, humans did not evolve these mega cities, big, huge cities in desert areas. They would have smaller villages, encampments around Desert Springs, which is one of the areas of Los Angeles that was amongst the first to be settled, etc. And I have heard many long term strategic uh, researchers, futurists, say that eventually the United States will have to retract its desert population. We're talking about Arizona, Nevada, parts of California, Utah, New Mexico, that in actuality, these areas just do not naturally support so many people. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, there's this definite conversation about, population and also these decisions around, the energy drivers, the demand to support the increase in population. But we also have to look at, there's a cycle, right? As many people are born, many people, pass. So what are the real numbers? What are the real population numbers, when we think about it? But more importantly, yes, where are the people going? Where are the people headed? Where are the opportunities being created to draw people to a particular region or location across this country? But it is important to think about all of those variables holistically. So where you live, again, where you live and where you invest don't necessarily have to be the same places. Where you live and how you invest don't necessarily have to be the same asset classes. But it does require that you educate yourself irrespective of whatever the choice is. So if you're building a family legacy and you want to create generational housing, for example, for your family, yeah, it's important to think about what is perceived to be the future possibility of that particular community being sustainable long.
Mm-hmm.
And is that the right idea? Or is it better to build up a portfolio and exchange it into asset class that allows you to receive a passive return on real estate as opposed to owning real and operating the real estate directly yourself? Real estate is a big bucket. And oftentimes people make a mistake of thinking that they understand real estate when really their knowledge is very limited in the scheme of things. With this current administration, President Trump has built his wealth in real estate, in commercial real estate development. So his policies will oftentimes favor those who occupy those sectors because he's
Mm-hmm.
executing policies that are favorable for his own interests, his
Mm-hmm.
long-term investment interests and holdings. So again, it's an opportunity for those to kind of shift and begin to think differently, but it's not something to, venture into without realizing that you require a real estate development team is a team of a number of sophisticated folks. You need to understand the land use. So there's a lot of legalities around land use. You need to understand how you finance the assets. Real estate developers have specialties. Not every developer does everything, and that's by design. And how you enter the market and build, if you will, your calling card informs what it is you're able to be financed for as you go along your journey. And
Mm-hmm.
again, that's for very specific reasons, right? Because those that finance real estate assets understand the complexities involved in a development project as well as a development cycle.
Mm-hmm. In the back of my mind, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking about over the horizon type of solutions and challenges that we face that lets us all know that the current system cannot continue as it is. Among the many solutions that are being brought forward is the expansion and utilization of tiny homes. I know this is something I've heard you speak about before. What are your thoughts about the viability of investing in tiny homes?
Um, the viability depends upon what it is and where it is in terms of the scale. So I wouldn't say that there's an opinion about it. I'm a certain type of developer, so my expertise is in commercial mixed use, and now I have an asset class in the wellness space. All right, so I have three particular areas that are interrelated. So what I decided as a developer that I wanted to create communities where people live, heal, work, and play, right? So those are mixed use environments that leverage those types of asset classes. So as you've heard me speak before, my expertise is around multifamily. So I typically built not high rises, but mid rise multifamily assets. My smallest property is about a $50 million property. And I controlled a portfolio where we had the largest privately held REIT in the nation, over 99,000 doors. Okay. So, and then we returned to mixed use before I exited that organization, and then went to an organization that was building a portfolio of commercial assets that then we were subdividing airspace. And most recently, I've assembled a portfolio of assets that I've underwritten for wellness and the hospitality space that I'm entering. But I also look at asset classes like storage, industrial units. So again, I understand certain sectors. Tiny homes, when you talk about a tiny home, if you're talking to me and you're saying, hey, we have, 10 acres and we're looking to build a community, that's one conversation that's different than, oh, I'm looking to buy a tiny home. A tiny home could be an okay investment if it is that it's an investment that works for you financially. Again, remember, I began with, you invest where you can make money and you live where you want to live. So how you believe your life goals are, your patterns, if you're living in a particular community because you have a family and you have children, then the school system is going to be of importance to you, especially if you have young children that need to be educated in a public school system or in a private school system. You want to have access to those things. Where are you looking to place these tiny homes? Is it on land that you own, or is it on land that you're leasing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good points you make. And of course, it would be nice, in my mind, to be able to build the Kujichagulia villages as a new type of intentional community using tiny homes as part of an integrated matrix of commercial and mixed use, etc., but with the intention of efficiency being the entire project. I love the idea of tiny homes, yet realize that the momentum of the U.S. property and real estate industries does not want the competition from tiny homes and innovative outside the box thinkers. Your thoughts on that?
I wouldn't say that that's true. I think it's about what are the zoning, what are the regulatory environments, where have you identified land that you want to either by right be able to execute those plans, or have to have the plans modified in order to execute those plans. Look, I had a portfolio of a small lot development projects throughout the city of Los Angeles, and that was a regulatory decision that approved small lots for development prior to ADU. So no, it's an option. You just have to again understand the process, and that is identify a site. And is that site zoned for your particular use? Do you have a by right to execute your plans, or does it require modifications? That's the beginning. So
Okay.
it's real practical. It's real practical. It doesn't have to be pie in the sky. Tell me your site. Where is it located? What are the acreage? What is the infrastructure? The first thing that I do when I'm looking at a site is typically, especially if I'm looking at a site for some type of residential use, I visit the site with my civil engineer. And the first thing that we're looking at is we're trying to understand what is the utility infrastructure and what has to be provided, for this particular use. And then from there, I evaluate, what is the zoning risk? What is the current by right law of how this particular parcel of land can be utilized? And what is the desire that we have in terms of how we want to utilize it? And what are the gaps between those two realities?
Okay. A lot to consider, no doubt. Among the many ways that individuals and family trusts or small enterprises have been able to accumulate wealth and property is short-term rentals. Airbnb has exploded, I think, in the last 6 years or 10 years into a global profit-making enterprise. But I read a story, a report just recently that Airbnb has kind of hit a wall and may be on the verge of not collapsing, but basically removing itself from the competition. For one, the cost of Airbnb and B&B in the early days was very, very reasonable, and now it's not at all very reasonable. Your thoughts on Airbnb, and have you seen any ideas that it may have a stressed future?
Airbnb is like any other business idea. It is a leasing model. It's using a particular asset that has a certain type of zoning. And you have to realize again, what is the zoning? What is the regulatory environment? Everybody, figured out a way. When you figure out a way to execute a model that is contrary to a particular model, Airbnb was an answer to the high cost of hotels in certain markets. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That was the intention of the founders, is they were creating an alternative to those that needed to stay in different markets, and also at what was beginning this so-called sharing, community of being willing to share things, cars, homes, other things, um, for the idea that, maybe we could reduce some of the consumption. Everybody doesn't need to have an individual vehicle. Everybody doesn't, as you opened up with, if I have a home, maybe I could have some other people participate in helping me pay for that home so that it's not just dependent upon my income. So, but still with that, who complained are the hotels, the adjacent properties that are paying taxes to operate as a hotel. It's the same thing if we were to talk about, Uber or Lyft, who were impacted, the taxis. So you have to realize that each of these sectors are sectors that have associations, lobbying groups that are in position to protect their interest so that their businesses are sustainable. So we all, as business people, have to mitigate against competitors coming in and eating our lunch, right? So at the end of the day, where you find Airbnb pushback are in environments where communities feel like they're threatened by, transient sort of activities in residential
Mm-hmm.
communities, and they're not interested in having that pierce their neighborhoods. It's usually the NIMBYs, not in my backyard, folks who decided what they believe their experiences are. And then again, you have homeowner associations that typically govern the use of what happens within a communities, and homeowner associations can be very restrictive, and so they use their power of their CCNRs to regulate what happens in those particular environments. So about if it is you're able to explore Airbnb as a way for creating an additional income stream because of a property that you own or a property that you're looking to lease for that use, it goes back to foundationally, what is the regulatory environment? And who are the demand users? And what would be their reason for using a particular Airbnb as opposed to a hotel? What are those
Mm-hmm.
other factors that go into their decision? It requires the same type of business planning in any business. And
Mm-hmm.
every business has its moment where, the cheese is moved.
Yeah. Who
And so
moved my cheese?
if you're not preparing for the cheese to potentially be moving, there's a saying, what got you here is not going to keep you here. But if
Mm-hmm.
you're still running off of yesterday's plans of what got you here, then sadly you're on your way out. You're going to be run over by what's next. You have to
Mm-hmm.
always be investing in strategy, in knowledge. Those of us that develop strategies like myself, we're compensated handsomely for that because we spend the time to understand what are the variables. When I go and look at a site, I see things that without my training, my lens, the average person wouldn't see. But I know what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm. I know in East Africa, where I've spent quite a bit of time and invested quite a bit of energy, the growth of Nairobi, Kenya has been quite amazing of recent years. I've been there two times, and in the interim between my first visit in 2014 and my second visit in 2022, we saw just an explosive growth of apartment buildings, tall apartment buildings. And I came to understand that a lot of young urban professionals, backed by their families, were buying these apartment units for very inexpensive, especially if you buy the apartment unit while the building is still being constructed. You get it so much significantly cheaper because they do need the operational monies for building. But they were getting these and renting them out as Airbnb units, and just about, I think, 6 days a month renting that out would pay for the cost of that property. So we saw a phenomenal growth in young urban professionals acquiring and developing these Airbnb properties. One of the complaints about Airbnb properties is maintenance and cleaning. And in the United States, the maintenance and cleaning fees can be so high that it makes the hotel by far the more convenient choice to stay. But in East Africa, we're talking about maid cleaning facilities, etc., that are extremely low cost because of the labor market there. Your thoughts about, or are you familiar with, the investment in these type of short-term rentals in emerging market nations?
If there's demand, okay, real estate follows demand, right? And so, as I said, whenever you're looking at a community for development, you're looking at what are going to be the demand drivers. In urban markets, what's typically surrounds an urban development is there's some type of employee base, there's some type of commercial market to support that base. And then also there's a demographical profile of who it is the development is being targeted for. So you're sort of asking kind of two questions that are related and not related in a sense. Yes, the demographical profile of who the development is being designed for is this set of urban dwellers that particularly maybe early in their career may not have set up families, may not have a need for larger footprint living or desire to be in the suburbs, for example, versus being in the urban community. So that's one decision. At the same time, now that I have this asset, there's other folks who are now traveling into the particular area, and maybe there's not sufficient infrastructure, or maybe people want alternative options beyond the hotels that are available as places to stay. And so that makes it ripe for a solution such as Airbnb. So if I own a property and the CCNRs do not restrict my ability to have transient rentals in my unit, then it's a win-win. It's, does the property allow that? Not all properties allow you to, the CCNRs don't always allow you to have that particular use. And, or if it does, you may not have a market that demands the use of those particular units. So it all depends upon those, variables. If it is, it makes sense in a particular market. But globally, yeah, it's a great opportunity. It's a great way to have an asset that, again, is generating some. Now that's an investment. When you are using your income to pay a mortgage, it is a liability. When you have
Hmm.
figured out how to use your income and someone else's income to pay your mortgage, it is an investment.
Hmm. Looking at the landscape, across the landscape, there could be no denying that major Wall Street corporations are disruptors in the real estate investment marketplace. From your perspective, give us your opinion on big corporations with almost unlimited access to capital, or especially unlimited access to credit. Big corporations like BlackRock, which is here in the Las Vegas area, has been one of the corporations, and I could find you the names of others. I think you know this field, that have been big disruptors to the function of real estate transactions and wealth development.
Absolutely, especially as you talk about moving out of, commercial markets and entering into residential markets.
Hmm.
They make it impossible because they do drive up the price of properties, and it's an uneven competition. You can't compete against the horsepower that someone has when they can walk in and pay cash for a particular asset, and they're and hundreds of millions of dollars at a time. And so this again is why it's important to recognize where you have an opportunity that's off the radar, perhaps at that moment. You know what I mean? Sometimes we have to build off the radar instead of being in direct competition with the big boys because we can't play the same game that they can play. And that then comes back to we've been talking about nationally the election cycle, but this is where you begin to understand the relationship with your local government and the importance of being able to enact restrictions so that these types of buyers don't outpace the average, working person attempting to buy a property and also drive up the cost of these properties. I see, and again, it's aimed for, the big players in the market. Remember, if I'm a housing developer and I'm creating a community with hundreds of units, and I can pre-sell, 20 to 30% of my units to another person that can write me a big check for those units at a discount, as you indicated earlier, that's going to help me facilitate my financing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to take it because if I sell it, then it changes the dynamic between what I have to finance and borrow. And so it puts me in a stronger position to complete my development in a more favorable manner.
Mm-hmm. And I mentioned BlackRock, but there are a number of other these major corporations that are in disrupting this marketplace. Just real briefly, I did a quick search. Brookfield Asset Management, Goldman Sachs, Kohlberg, Kravis Roberts, Blackstone, Carlyle Group, Starwood Capital Group, and others. So as they get access to debt-based financing of their industrial and GDP development, is it going to continue to tip the balance, tip the scale against the best self-interest of small, medium-sized enterprises that might be into real estate investment and or the family?
Yes, because sadly, again, we haven't leveraged an ability to work together and we keep empowering these organizations with our resources. You and I
Mm-hmm.
had a conversation about how much money we spend, trillions of dollars on helping their businesses succeed. Yeah,
That's right.
we're helping them succeed. And we won't turn those same dollars towards our own interests. Listen, as you and I know, we've had this conversation. I'm raising capital for what is a very sophisticated investment that's been underwritten in such a favorable way that a lot of our people could be wealth creators. But to even get a small interest from my folks to do something as simple as put down a deposit, towards something that's going to benefit them. Oh, get back to me after you make it.
Whoa.
Let me know when
Yeah.
it's done.
Yeah. That sounds just like just plain
And it's
avoidance.
like, okay, well, all right, all right. These same folks, that's why they're so confident in what it is they can do. So, again, not being proactive. It's like, listen, you have an opportunity to be on the ground floor of an opportunity that's going to grow. It's backed by real estate. The real estate has been underwritten in a favorable way, and the use of the real estate is very promising. And there's data to support all of these statements. This is not something that I just pulled out of my head. This is 25, 30 years of work, 30 years of running plays to validate and determine that these particular practices are viable, but also recognizing that that's what the big players do is we look holistically at population, at regulatory environments, at environmental, we look at all of these things in the analysis of determining the highest and best use and what creates a favorable opportunity. And so I've taken all of those sophisticated, experiences and training and understanding and figured out a business model that would be viable, that several people could gain returns, significant returns on their money invested backed by secure assets, a secure portfolio. I told you that I helped to lead the exit of the largest privately held REIT in the nation. I know something about this.
Mm-hmm.
I know quite a bit about this.
We're going to begin to wrap it up short. I did just, because this area we're talking about right now generated this stream of questions in my mind, which means will probably have to return to this in the future because it's so important. Real estate is the primary means by which most intergenerational wealth has been created, and that's just a fact that simply cannot be ignored. So going forward, here, let me see 1 second. Bear with me here. I have pulled up this article. I'm just going to give you the headline, but I think this article is indicative of the very point that we're talking about, of how this big disruption by the globalists, the corporations, I'm railing about them in my upcoming book, Disaster Preparedness for World Wars 5 and 6. And according to my analysis, World War 5 is the workers, middle class versus the big corporation and its hierarchy. But here's just the title from CNBC. This published February 2023. Wall Street has purchased hundreds of thousands of single-family homes since the Great Recession. Here's what that means for rental prices. And of course, there's nothing pretty to come out of that. In the remaining minutes, I'd just like to have you, I trust that you are familiar with this trend as we've been talking about it. Just riff on that. Tell us what's on your mind when you see headlines like this.
Well, sadly and personally, I have had the opportunity to experience it. When I came to Vegas, I rented a home from one of these such organizations that basically bought, thousands of these types of properties. The company owns assets in another category. I'll say storage. That's all I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
And they were known as bullies in the industrial sector. They are known as bullies because they're publicly traded. So they have unlimited access to capital,
Mm-hmm.
yet they're cruel in how they execute their business plans, in my assessment. Um, well, they're no different in how it is they're executing their plans in the single family housing ownerships. I would say that they are the closest to legal slumlords
Mm-hmm.
as you can imagine. And in the period of time that I've had this particular property, the increase in the cost for this property has continued to grow, while the
Mm-hmm.
investment in the maintenance and upkeep is not on par.
That's
And if
right.
I were a private owner of this property in the community, there's no way that I wouldn't have been making investments to continue to keep the property on par in the community. Yet I've watched stucco deterioration. In fact, sadly, I've watched all kinds of abuses, just in terms of maintenance, substandard, so much so that, believe it or not, it's funny you asked me that question. Actually, overnight, I was thinking in my mind what type of litigation I might put together against these particular uh, parties associated with this property, because it's gone beyond just slum and low maintenance, but it seems that there's even some additional uh, racially motivated behavior in some of the actions to myself as a renter of this
Mm-hmm.
property. So yes, I believe that it's a big problem, and I believe that it leaves those of us looking for places, suitable places to live with limited options.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate today's conversation. We're going to begin to wrap it up right now. I just wanted our listening audience to know that they can develop a deeper conversation with you, learn more about what you do, as well as check out your podcast. Please do. And I did just put up a link to 420 Wellness Jamaica. Health and wealth is what you talk about there. But how can people learn more about what you're doing, more about these very topics we've been talking about today?
Absolutely. Th- at the moment, Blue Diamond Capital is the commercial development where I advise and address commercial property, commercial finance, and business finance. Find me on LinkedIn, and then if you're interested, then I can respond to you there based on your particular interest. I'm going to be publishing a few more uh, details, updated content for Blue Diamond Capital. So we're in the process of upgrading our website right now. So it's down at the moment. I've been, as you know, involved with the whole wellness portfolio that's being created. So yes, the focus has been around the global portfolio of wellness assets that I'm in the process of funding and launching. If it is that you're interested in that, I'm telling you, there'll be some great opportunities. So, certainly if you want to know more, go to LinkedIn, send me a message, and then we'll connect appropriately from that point.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, good conversation today. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share before we go ahead and wrap it?
No, I just say that guess what? There's always an opportunity. So look for the opportunity based on the cycle that you're in and also anticipate the next set of opportunities. Because one thing that I know is it's all cyclical. And the organizations that I've had the privy of being involved with figure out how to make money irrespective of the cycle. So they make money in a bear cycle, they make money in a bull cycle, they make money irrespective of the administration leading the country. So, as entrepreneurs, as citizens, we must understand those variables as well.
And last word, kind of where we began, the election cycle is just coming now, or it's come. The inaugurations, of course, will be in January to see the basis for what changes we should expect. But for those who had their heart broken, any words of encouragement? You did say cycles happen, don't lose heart, but in particular, it appears to be that African American women in the voting bloc had their hearts broken as much as anyone else. Your thoughts?
Well, let's get in alignment and support one another and let's support some real big ideas, right? Because it's about that. If you have economic and political, if you have economic clout, right, which we do, we tend to control a lot of pocketbooks. But let's
That's
redirect
right.
these resources to some meaningful outcomes. Let's invest in some real things, some big thinkers, some folks that really do have the ability to deliver outcomes and put down, the stupid designer, things and waste it. You keep making other folks rich.
Mm-hmm.
Invest money in making some of us really wealthy with the ability to bring the team along. When you
That's
have
right.
economic power, you'll have political power.
That's right. All right, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks, Doc. You did a good job today. I want to say thank you to all of those of you who tuned in. We do see Cho C is watching us on you now. Brother Ronan checking in on the YouTube family. And of course, all of those of you who listen to our main channel, For Africa One and others, on we have a good sized audience. Make sure you hit the like button and drop a word if you can from time to time. Just let us know you are in the family. You consider yourself to be an important finger on these hands. Only when the fingers of the hand collaborate, cooperate, recognize each other and their potential and their power can they come together, and the hands eventually know their true potential and their true strength. Thanks, Doc, for bringing it strong today. You did a great job.
Thank you for having me. This was a fun conversation. I'm passionate. In fact, I'm on my way to go look at an investment that I'm looking to make. So it was
Awesome,
timely.
awesome, awesome.
All
Well,
right.
hey, I'm going to be looking at it's not what it is an investment, but a new collaboration. We've talked so much about having a media production center here in this city, and someone called me with some really exciting news. I'm going to take a look at the facilities on Saturday, and hopefully, we'll all be able to come together and sit down and make some great collaboration plans, having access to a beautiful studio like this.
Absolutely. I have a studio development. I have two studio development projects and an industrial site that I'm looking at. So, yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to get out of here. Thanks, Doc.
All right. Take care.
All right. And to our listening audience, this was a good week. Monday through Friday, we come at you daily. And we do the best we can to do the best we can with information that empowers, informs, inspires, and excites us to deliberate actions. This is why we have Dr. Steph with us twice a month. Do tell your friends to tell their friends. We have our own, and ours ain't so bad at all. Peace and prosperity to each and every one of you on your favorite. We aim to be your favorite. We are LIB Radio, LIB TV. We are living in black.com. Peace, y'all, and prosperity. Hey, you know what I'm talking about.